Whoosh looks like a gondola. It is not a gondola. A gondola is a cable that goes back and forth, usually just between 2 points. The vehicles are pretty dumb. They grab on, they just go back and forth all day. This is an autonomous vehicle system that happens to go across cables. So, yes, you have cables on poles stretching across an area of the city, but the vehicles aren't traveling along the same path. They're independent, they're autonomous. They pick you up, usually at ground level, take you up to the main level where the cables are, take you wherever you need to go across the cable. So they can turn, they can switch, they can take different paths. You're going to go right where you're headed, nonstop trip every time. And then it pulls off to the side, goes down to ground level, drops you off, and now that vehicle's free to move somebody else. So it's, from an infrastructure side, very lightweight, the lowest cost way of adding capacity in a crowded area. And from a user perspective, it's just a wonderful trip. You've got a view, you've got this nonstop travel. It's everything you could dream of, probably.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Transit Tangents. My name is Lewis.
And I'm Chris.
And today we have a very special guest joining us today, Jeral Poskey from Swyft Cities. Chris and I found Swyft Cities online. I think I was scrolling through Twitter one day, and I saw the amazing animation of what looks like a gondola. I know it's a little bit different, and we'll get into the specifics of that later. Kind of floating above the city, and I was like, wow, this thing looks really cool. One thing led to another. We ended up reaching out, and we actually found out that you all at Swyft Cities had been listening to some of our podcasts, which we're very thankful for. Really cool concept. And again, yeah, the thing that really drew me in the beginning was, yes, this thing looks such like a gondola, but yeah, the concept of it being able to go directly from point to point and essentially traveling between the different stations and going exactly where the user wants to go is pretty amazing. I'm curious, I know a little bit about your background, but do you want to share with us what made you come up with this idea? What were you working on where you were like, this is going to be the solution to the problem that I'm currently facing?
I think there were two starts of the story. The first start of the story happened a few miles from probably where you are now at the UT undergraduate library when I read about people making autonomous monorails like this, sort of on-demand vehicles on a monorail setting. I fell in love with that and have dedicated my career across multiple paths to making that happen. But the real turning point came when I was in Google's real estate division. We were building out millions of square feet of office, of now adding in residential and mixed, entertainment areas and open space to make these really incredible corporate campuses. And it turned out you can't do that if you just built it all for the car. We're in a suburban setting. I'm no longer with Google, but we were in a suburban setting. It's an area where 90-something% of the people drive, and you just can't build that type of environment and build thousands and thousands of structured parking spaces to make it all happen. It just doesn't work. So we were given the challenge to go find something new. Something that was out there was the original thought. There's so many self-driving cars and flying cars that we assumed that we just go find the right new technology and we will solve our problems. And it turns out nobody is solving the problem of the short distance 1 to 5 mile congestion problem. I think a lot of people are really hooked on the 20-mile commute. That's maybe 3% of daily travels. Billions of dollars are going to solve that 3% problem. In reality, 50 to 55% of all trips are in this little smaller district area type travel, and nobody was touching it. So then we got permission to try something new. And we sat there with goals of it needs to be cost effective, it needs to be environmentally sustainable, it needs to be very flexible, expandable, great for the user, it needs to really attract people. And we just started with those basics, had a few different ideas, and this one just soared to the top.
Right now, you've been talking with cities to try to get them interested. Where are you making headway in potentially deploying the Whoosh system?
Yeah, it's half of the people we're talking to are cities and half are private sector real estate developers. So we've got private sector clients in Japan, in Saudi Arabia, in New Zealand, and in the US, as well as certain private also in the public sector, mostly in the US in the public sector. And I would say the trends tend to be a place that has a little bit of an entertainment, space. Could be a ski resort, could be a more urban entertainment area. And they want to move people around. They don't want to build as much parking, but they also need it to be a little bit special of a trip. in every single case, they also then imagine a future phase. So I didn't talk about the expandability before. Because it's not a traditional gondola with those two fixed endpoints, it's made more like Legos. You can add on, you can subtract, you can expand the system. So they're picturing it starting small and then growing over time. So first it may be on their property, and then they want to reach the train station, or then they want to reach, hotels that are, some 1 or 2 miles away, and they want to make this tighter district network. It turns out the cities think the same way, actually. A lot of them are fast-growing cities that are in a more sprawling environment, and they're having a hard time figuring out how to retrofit transit. And so it's like, wow, what's going to be the right transit for us in our less dense land use? Or it's cities that have train stations that could be effective, but the actual end use is like a mile or two away from the train station is. I sometimes tell the story, and you have a Texas audience. I took DART from the airport down to downtown Dallas, and I'm familiar from that area. And there's a University of Dallas station. Like, oh, that's cool. It's got a tower. It'd be awesome to look at. Then you get to that station and realize, I don't know where the University of Dallas is from here, but it's not at this station. Turns out it's about a mile away, but it was, you got to get that last mile. And in sort of Texas weather, Texas heat, you need something else to make those last mile connections.
Absolutely. And I think Dallas is such an interesting example because, while they do have some decent transit-oriented development happening around some of their stations, once you get a certain radius away from that, it turns into kind of sprawling suburbs very quickly that are currently very difficult to serve by transit. And something that's really unique about the Whoosh system is that it can kind of solve some of the issues that buses can't in a lot of cases, where a winding bus route through, a bunch of cul-de-sacs and whatnot through a neighborhood are difficult to do. Whereas if you can, implement this system into the right areas, feeding folks into those train stations, feeding folks into those other destinations that are more suburban, it feels like a perfect kind of complement to those existing systems. Something I appreciate that you all kind of talk about in a lot of your online presence is whatnot is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're not saying that this is like the solution to transit everywhere, but it's a piece of the puzzle, right?
Right. There is no the solution to transit, and we are not it either. Yes, we are a piece that fits. If you think capacity wise, trains I really feel like need a good 8 to 10,000 passengers per hour to be effective. Buses, really it's about 1,200 passengers an hour is where you could really peak out a bus route in most places in the U.S. That's a huge gap between transit systems that are effective at 1,200 versus 8,000. We're in that middle range to fill that massive, massive gap of opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm curious. I know that in Sugarland, Texas, is one spot that this has kind of been talked about. Are you able to talk about kind of where things are or how that project kind of came to be? I know, like you mentioned, we have a lot of folks. We're based here in Austin, Texas, but Sugarland's not too far away, a suburb of Houston. I'm curious if you're able to share anything about that project.
Well, yeah, it's a problem that is what they have is we call a barrier problem. Sometimes that's a river, sometimes it's a railroad track, but in Texas, it's often just a freeway. And you can have development on 4 corners, and it all looks dense, but you can't get from one corner to the other without a lot of hassle, without a car. And so that's the origin. They have a nice central sort of downtown community center area. They have some other pockets of density. And there's just a lot of traffic everywhere, but there's a lot of traffic interconnecting. And I really think there's a lot of there's like trips that aren't happening. If you could just get from one to the other, you could make the whole area more lively. So that's the problem they are looking to solve. They find us to be an effective solution. And now they're that's our most public sector client. So they're going through the traditional funding routes of checking for the different grant sources and such. So I like that system. I like what it can do, really, and also bring people into. They've got some BRT type routes that go into Houston in that direction. So helping serve those routes would be ideal for us.
We'll jump right back into the episode in just a second. But first, if you haven't liked this video or left a comment, please do so. It helps us out quite a bit. And we also have some exciting news.
Yeah, if you want to support the show, we have swag. We have merchandise. Go check out our store where you can get hats, t-shirts, hoodies, a bunch of other things coming, new designs for that, all going to be coming up in the next few weeks.
Lastly, if you want to support the show directly and get access to early episodes, you can do so on Patreon. But without further ado, let's jump right back into the episode.
One thing that I'd be interested to hear. So Lewis and I, when we first became, not necessarily when we first became obsessed with gondolas, but when we first started talking about this podcast, it started with a happy hour discussion where we spent a long amount of time talking about Austin specifically and how if Project Connect, our current light rail initiative, didn't happen, we were like, oh, just replace it all with gondolas. And one of those reasons that we were worried about Project Connect is just the sheer cost. Do you have kind of an estimate on how you would compare the cost of deploying a system like Whoosh in a metropolitan area versus, what we see with light rail, which can cost billions of dollars per mile?
Well, I would. They're not apples to apples. I mean, that's number one.
Right.
We're not trying to replace light rail. We're not going to serve your 25-mile route from downtown to Georgetown or wherever. No, but what we look at are these pockets where our infrastructure cost is $5 million a mile, adding in vehicles, adding in other things, you're planning. I think an early system is probably $20 million a mile for the first one or two. Everybody really has talked to us. It's like, just give me 3 or 4 stations to start. We do have one client in the U.S. who's likely to be one of the very first that's doing 12, which is great. But most people want just that small, like a 40, 50, $60 million system. Let's prove that out. And then we can start expanding from there because the economies of scale, it gets more cost effective as it grows. So getting that first one checked off, proven, tested out is really how people are starting to think about it. And for comparison, that 40, 50, $60 million in the transit world is not much. And that's why we have real estate clients, private sector clients. A parking garage is going to cost you $50 million just to start. I think the most expensive one I've worked on is $386 million for a single parking structure. So this is small dollars even in public sector, but it's also even small dollars in the real estate world.
I think a good comparison in the urban setting is sort of, again, I understand you're trying to connect sort of point-to-point service, getting 2 larger transit lines. But I think of like streetcars. In a lot of cases, cities have deployed streetcars where they only move so many miles, 5 miles of streetcar line. And I feel like this is could be a good alternative for cities if they're looking for a cost-effective measure.
I almost want to disagree with you on the streetcar a little bit. Yeah. I mean, I think so. We just left Kansas City is why we're mentioning the streetcar. And I get the point you're trying to make, but I almost think like this isn't going to be something that's like replacing like a fixed line service. And like in Kansas City, like that gets quite a bit of things, but to feed people into the streetcar, maybe more so. I don't know.
So Kansas City is a bad example because it's a good streetcar. Think about what we experienced.
A bad example because it's so good.
Yeah, but think about what we experienced in Dallas, where we went from South Dallas into downtown. That's a use case where you're crossing a large river. Maybe the light rail wasn't the best solution.
Yeah.
And
I think you're hitting a problem where transit brains struggle with figuring out where to put us because our whole lives have been trained on it's a line, it's a bus line, it's a train line, and the idea of something that operates either as loops or even as a spine with spurs, like it's a little bit of it's not a one-to-one replacement for any of those things, which is both a tremendous advantage, but also a little bit of a curse when you're trying to make apples to apples comparison or just fit it into a brain that's always been trying to figure out where to draw the lines.
Totally. I think to me, like, I love the concept of, I really do think that this can help fill a void in the end of the line, connecting into the suburbs, like more difficult to fulfill areas where like traditional transit is kind of lacking. I'm curious though. So Whoosh is just the name of this one piece of Swyft Cities. I'm curious why the name Swyft Cities, and is there kind of something else you're going for with this whole thing?
Yeah, when we were at Google, and it was originally Project Swyft, we had those goals. We tried to figure out if there was a solution. We had several companies engaged to try to find the right solution. A company called Home Solutions out of New Zealand came up with this switchable cable-based system. And so Whoosh is their name for the cable-based system, the hardware. Swyft Cities is here to put in the software. That's the magic behind the scenes to run it all and keep the vehicles getting where you need to be, when you need to be there. And also we are there because in doing implementation, we're not here to be Swyft Transit Company and just put in the system. the fact of why Google needed this is there's a maximum density you can build out when you have a car-based world. Just there's only so many cars. When you start to add in something like this, you can now make a different style of development. You can make a different density of the city that's basically impossible to cost effectively do today. So we are Swyft Cities, not just to deliver the transportation, but to enable these like cool 6 to 8 to 12 story type density where you still have your coffee shops. You're not overwhelmed by skyscrapers. You still have open space. You still have the world of Paris, of Barcelona, of those places that you want to go to on vacation. You can get that by having the right mix of transportation and land use. And that's a mix that just it's rare for it to be cost effective today because the transportation is just so hard to get right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I can't stop. I said to Chris just before you came on, I was like, I can't stop thinking about this. I'm not sure how familiar with Austin you are, but I would love to see this as a connector from the Mueller neighborhood and connecting into the Red Line, which currently the Red Line goes so close, but not close enough to really be able to walk to, connecting Mueller to ACC to that Red Line station to a few other areas in there. Just like, I mean, there are a million places in my head. And I'm like, wow, this would be such a cool piece to the puzzle to really solve some transit problems.
Well, I think Austin and a number of just so many of our sprawling cities that have been built really without being planned for transit. The phrase transit-oriented development means the transit is there. How do we put development around it? In most of those cities, it's more like the development is already there. How do we bring transit to it? Mm-hmm. So I would call us development-oriented transit because unfortunately, the ship has sailed where the development's going to be. Now, how do we provide a transit system that will work with reality, not with what we wish would have happened, 30 years ago, 50 years ago?
Absolutely.
I'm curious, have you had any direct conversations with people in some of these communities that have expressed interest in a solution like this and what some of the feedback you've gotten even from people that aren't necessarily on the government side or the planning side, but actual community members?
Yeah, I think it's been, we've been 100% responsive. We haven't been going out and knocking on doors. We've been responding to people who have a problem. And so by the time they come to us, there's been a bit of a problem identified. And when you talk to the people, I think the number one concern is around where is that going to go? Aesthetics? Do I want that? And so I'll take Dallas as an example where we used them. We took a map and you draw, red lines over all the parts of the map that are single family homes and tree lined streets and all the places you don't want to go. You don't want this kind of thing. And I'll say that took off 85% of the city. But that remaining 15% is 70% of the economic activity in the city of Dallas. So we're not trying to go everywhere. In fact, most places we're not needed. But then you look at the places where we do fit, where people aren't going to scream that you're going over my swimming pool. That's fine. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity. That's the places where we want to be. That's the places you need to move people. So I think as long as we come out and tell people we're not going over your backyard, it's a true NIMBY. I mean, and I would agree. I would be the first to agree with them. Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of places to go across the city that is not in anyone's backyard.
Absolutely. I've got one more question for you, and then I don't, Chris, if you've got another one, go for it. Can you walk us through, how are you envisioning the rider experience? You walk up to a station. How do you tell it where to go? What are the? And I know you don't. It's not. We don't have it yet, but what is the interface, the system that you feel will the end user will be able to experience while they're riding this?
Yeah, I will say that most of our early customers imagine it being free at their site, their ski resort, their development. And so you just get on and push a button. But the long term, what you'd be picturing is the Uber app. You're telling it where you're going. You don't need to be looking at a route or a schedule. The stations are generally at grade. So you just go up like a bus stop. You're going to wait for it there on a sidewalk. You step into a vehicle, tap your phone to enter the vehicle. That tells it the station you've already picked out, so you're in the right vehicle. And then at that point, you're done. You sit back. It takes you up into the air. It does whatever turns and switches it needs to do, and you're not going to stop again until you get to your destination. And so you don't have to worry about missing your stop or falling asleep. It only stops when you're at your destination.
That feels similar
very
to
cool.
like the Waymo opera. I don't know if we've had Waymo here in Austin for a while, but that's to me how the Waymos kind of operate. You fill it in ahead of time, you press a button, the doors open, and then you're just kind of getting whisked away where you're going.
But you're stuck in traffic.
Yeah. Waymo without the traffic. Yes.
Yeah. I think the only thing I can think of in the U.S. that I haven't really personally experienced, but the only thing I can think of that's similar to this would be something like the PRT system in Morgantown, West Virginia, where you have a car I think that will take you point to point destinations. It's obviously a pretty small system, but they're the small cars. I don't think they're on rail, but they run through a track.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I can really think of that's similar. Are there any other types of systems that even come close to this?
No, not. I mean, there's a similar system at Heathrow Airport and one in Abu Dhabi, but nothing that's like this. There's no word port in the transportation lexicon, so Whoosh is it.
Awesome. I guess is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to get to that you've got coming up or anything like that?
Well, I mean, listening to some of the past episodes, the tie-in between land use and transportation, I think we just have to beat that drum that the two are intricately tied, and it's hard but not impossible to kind of undo. I'm going to say mistakes. It depends on your point of view, but I think many cities are to the point where they say, traffic is far worse, and it's far worse than was expected. Way worse than when I moved here. Everybody says that, whether you moved here 2 years ago or 50 years ago, traffic is so much worse than when I moved here, is what everyone says. And it's just going to keep trending that way. I think all of our cities are growing, and some are growing exponentially fast. So what do you do? I think I've already given you the line of development-oriented transit, but I think everybody who's out there, Project Connect being a good example, great, you can put in transit. The easiest place to put rail is on old freight lines, except they're not really where anybody ever wanted to live as along a freight line. So the rail's kind of in the wrong place, but building it from scratch, as you said, is now billions of dollars to take over right of way. So finding that mix is important, but just go back and say it is a land use problem as much as it's a transportation problem.
Absolutely. No, couldn't agree more. And I mean, Chris and I have said this a whole bunch of times to each other, but like when we started this, we didn't think we would talk about housing nearly as much as we do in land use. And it's like, I have learned so much about land use and zoning and all of this stuff in the last year or so, a year and a half since we kind of been doing this. So, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm curious, where can folks learn more about this? Social media, website, that sort of thing.
Sure. Online, it's Swyft Cities, SWYFT, and your usual places, your internet, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, and then very soon. And we're recording this. One thing I didn't emphasize was how quickly we can build. So we have several clients that are lining up for 2027 operations. We're recording this in early 25.
Yeah.
This is full operations from planning and design, but not construction started, to operations in 27, with even the first vehicles moving in 2026. So in 13 months from construction start to having vehicles moving. So very, very soon, we're going to have a couple of announcements on the two leading locations. And then we look forward to you being able to come to a site near you, or maybe not so near you, and actually take a ride on a system to get that sense of what it's really like. Because I think a lot of people just feel like we're fairy tale, good idea, hypothetical, and don't realize how close it is to reality. So hopefully we'll be on the show, and maybe we can all go together to visit one of these places.
Absolutely. We'd love that. Love
Definitely.
to get some firsthand experience.
Absolutely. Well, Jeral, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. For folks who are watching, if you have questions, thoughts about this episode, please leave a comment down below. We'll take some of them. We'll make sure Jeral gets them, and we can maybe get you some answers. We'd love to be able to, in the future, be able to come and ride one of these things soon. So thank you so much for taking the time. For folks watching, if you have not liked this video already, please consider doing so. It helps us out quite a bit. You can also subscribe, or you can support the show directly via our Patreon. We also have a brand new merch store, so if you want to support the show that way, that is another way to do it. Jeral, if you don't mind playing along with us here, we always end the show by saying, enjoy the rest of your Transit Tangents Tuesday. If you don't mind joining us for the Transit Tangents Tuesday, awesome. So thank you all so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your Transit Tangents Tuesday. That's going to be a funny one with Zoom, but that's okay.
Yeah, I'm saving that dough. Public transit's where it's at. Watch me